Ready? Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Colonel, we're going to get started. Good evening, everyone. This is the Public Safety Committee for the Baltimore City Council. I am Councilman Brandon Scott, chair of the committee. I am joined tonight to my left by Councilman Ryan Dorsey, vice chair to the committee from the 3rd District. To his far left, Councilman Zeke Cohen from the 1st District, member of the committee. To his right, Councilman Burnett from the 8th District, member of the committee. To my right, Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District, member of the committee. And to his right, Council Vice President Middleton from the 6th District. We are also joined by Liam Davis from the Council President's Office, Richard Cumridge, staff to the committee. We are also joined tonight by Drew Vetta, Director of the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, Kendra Parlock, Director of the Mayor's Office of Sustainable Solutions, our great budget director, Mr. Bob Siname, Deputy Commissioner Bonaparte. The floor is yours. Could you please introduce your team, sir?
Yes, sir. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the council. My name is Deputy Commissioner Andre Bonaparte, and I have with me this evening our staff, which consists of Colonel Garrity, who's the Chief of Patrol, Colonel Melvin Russell, Colonel Byron Conaway, trying to put this in order in terms of rank, Chief Dave Calley, Chief Steve Odell.
Commissioner, can your folks please, we know who they are, but this is televised so that they can wave their hands. Okay.
Everyone raise their hands, please. Thank you. We have Major Jim Handley. We have Lieutenant Colonel Latanya Lewis from OPR. We have Director Amy Guevara. Did I pronounce that correct? Okay. We have, I mentioned Chief Steve Odell, Chief Dave Calley from OPR. We also have Captain Chuck Thompson from Special Operations Division. And I believe, Lieutenant Colonel Worley also as well. Sorry, Colonel.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Deputy Commissioner, before we get started, I want to do this thing a little differently before we go into the crime. In the past few weeks, we've had some high-profile incidents involving police officers, and one in particular I wanted to ask some questions on. So we know that we had a police officer who was actually drunk on the job, and that was removed from his duty. Just a few follow-ups. Is there a follow-up investigation to whether there was a roll call for this officer before he went out in the street, whether supervisors saw him before he went out on the street? Because we're trying to see how he was able to get in that state without someone seeing him before citizens alerted other police officers.
Yes, sir. Obviously, an incident like that is of concern to us. I will tell you that by policy and procedures, all officers that are to report to duty should be supervised. They should be visually inspected by some superior officer just to make sure that they are duty ready, to include whether or not they obviously are prepared for duty, not just in terms of equipment, but also in their mental and physical capacity. This matter has been turned over to OPR for investigation, and I know that they are actually conducting, going through that process in terms of investigation. Chief Calley, I don't know if, did you have any additional information? Sir? You've covered it. Yes, so we are examining it. They had to look back to see who the actually on-duty supervision was for that day. And again, like in some of these instances, obviously there are overtime commitments that are performing in the agency and stuff like that, and various shifts that are coming in. So there may be a little bit unclarity, but we're just trying to find out exactly what that situation is that allowed that officer to go on the street in that capacity. So it is being investigated, I will tell you that, sir.
Thank you. We're being joined in a second by Councilman Eric Costello. We also joined in the back by Councilwoman Shannon Sneed from the 13th District, member of the committee, and her daughter, Baby Ray, who's also a member of the committee. Keeping that vein for a second, Mr. Deputy Commissioner, you know that the investigation into all those members of the department who came up in the gun trace task force who are still with us are very important to me. How many cases do we have that are open and or closed in reference to the gun trace task force?
Yes, sir. I will defer that question to Lieutenant Colonel Lewis, who's actually tasked with overseeing that investigation. Thank you.
Good evening, Lieutenant Colonel Lewis, OPR. On April the 5th, we received 9 cases. Of those 9 cases, 2 are closed with a finding of not sustained, and we have 7 pending cases. Out of those 9 cases, we have names of 9 individuals still assigned to the agency. I'm sorry, 1 is no longer with the agency, so we have 8.
Lieutenant Colonel, can you tell us where in the agency those folks are assigned, what division?
No, I can't give you that information at this time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I said that for my colleagues to remind them that I spent some time in Annapolis trying to change the law that allows us to see where our public employees work who are under investigation. Okay. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And you, Lieutenant Colonel, you said that of the 2 cases, you said they were non-sustained, right?
It was not sustained.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. You might want to stay there, ma'am. There's also come to my attention that there was an incident with a particular lieutenant who was caught on the wiretap in reference to giving out answers to a sergeant's test, okay. And that there was an investigation into this particular lieutenant who was disciplined but did not go through a trial board. Did we follow the proper protocols in reference to that case?
I would have to pass that to my superior. I'm only responsible for GTTF cases.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
This case, to my knowledge, came up through it was on the GTTF wiretap.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have that information. I know what case you're talking about, but I don't have the information in reference to that case.
Yes, ma'am.
You know, okay.
We can provide that information to you, sir, at a later date.
Thank you very much.
Sir, I'd also like to mention, for an oversight, that Chief Jim Gillis is also here from the Police Commissioner's Office.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
And then the last thing, and unless my colleagues have any questions, internal affairs related, is also come to my attention that there's an open investigation into alleged financial and other misconduct by members of BPD who were involved in recruitment in Puerto Rico. Is this known to be true?
Sir, I would defer that question to the Chief of OPR.
And I know you can't tell us the details, but a yes or no will suffice.
The answer is yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Can you tell us how many people are being investigated?
I don't have that exact number, and it's a fairly new investigation, and we really can't comment publicly on it right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Colleagues, any questions about internal affairs for numbers before we go into the crime? Councilman? Thank you. All right, Deputy Commissioner, it's been a rough few weeks for us. Can you tell us where we are year to date for the crime in comparison to last year, and then of course for me in comparison to 2014, because I could care less about comparing us to 2017.
Yes, sir. So first, let me start off by saying it certainly has been a rough period of time for us. Actually, we have pretty much have been on a slight bit of an increase since August 24th, where our violence seemed to have increased during that time period up through practically the end of September. We had put a lot of, obviously, emphasis and initiatives in place to try to combat that. Some of the things that we had to do was, just recently, we had to, put officers on to extended shifts. We also did things such as making administrative day details in terms of getting everyone on the street as much as we can to try to get in front of the violence that we were seeing here. We can actually speak to some of this violence. I'll let Colonel Conaway get into that momentarily. But I will say to you that we have certainly dialed up and ramped up our efforts to combat what we were seeing. There were some things that were occurring within the city that was connected to some organizations that we became aware of. So we had to put in a lot of legwork and a lot of time and a lot of analytics to try to see, get in front of, some of the things that was occurring there. But I will say to you, sir, that in terms of where we are today, month to date, we had 11 homicides compared to 13 this month. Year to date, 277 in 2017 compared to 243 this year, which is a reduction of 12.3%. In terms of shootings, we had 31 month-to-date shootings compared to 16 this year. 552 for 2017 compared to 510 last year, which is a reduction of about 8%. In terms of our crime comparisons for 7 days, looking at our year compared to 2014, in 2014, in the 7 day, there were 10 homicides compared to 8 for this year. And for 2017, that would have been a slight increase of about 33%. 2014 would be minus 20%. 28-day homicides in 2014 was 23 compared to 41 for the 28-day period for this year, and that would have had a 78% difference there. Year to date, 175 homicides compared to 243, which would have yielded a 39% increase. Shootings, 7 day, 9 in 2014 compared to 14 in 2018, and that increase would be 55%. 28-day, 26 in 2014 compared to 59 for 2018, and that increase would be 126%. Year-to-date, 284 versus 510 for the year-to-date for 2014 would have been 80%. Again, I spoke about this the last time we were here. I mean, obviously, there are many more challenges for the agency for 2018 compared to 2014. The staffing was significantly greater at that particular time. The agency, I want to say, had numbers upward close to probably 3,000 officers. And obviously, we know that we're not near that mark there today. So obviously, that's going to impact us. But at the same time, and just pointing out that crime for this year is still down compared to last year. And we're always making efforts and striding to meet those reductions. Our goal for 2018 is to have a 20% reduction in homicides for the year. It's something that all of the commanders in this room and everyone in the agency is focused on, and we will continue to stride in that direction moving forward.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Before we start going district by district, well, you know, I understand the difference in the staffing. I think that for us, it's also critically important to know that we also had a lot, significantly more people in the city in 2014.
I'm sorry, we had a lot of what, sir?
More people, as in citizens. We've lost a lot of population since 2014. We'll start this time. We'll start with the central district and go from the central district going up.
Sure, Colonel Gary.
Hold on for 1 second, Colonel. Let him turn the mic on. And while we're waiting, actually, I forgot to mention this earlier. We also, you can stay seated, Mr. Commissioner. The council is also disappointed again that the person who is acting as police commissioner, at least for until the end of the month, is not here. It's also for us, this is a sign of disrespect, not just from him and the police department, but from the administration, as we moved these dates to accommodate the police department and at the administration's wish, and the person who's supposedly leading the administration is not here this evening. And I don't know where many of you work, but I don't know of someone who can tell their bosses when they're winning and not coming to do something. So we just want to make that for the record again and have folks understand that this is why this system is broken. Colonel, the floor is yours.
So good evening, everyone. So I guess, how do you want me to break this down, Councilman?
So let's do, Colonel, let's do homicides, robberies, shootings. Let's do that, ag assaults.
Okay, so we'll start out with homicides in the Central District for the 7 day. This year for 7 day, it's 1 compared to 2 for last year. Let me do 7 or just 28 day. What would you like?
Let's do all 7 and 28 day, and year to date.
Yes, sir. For the 28 day, we have 2 homicides in the Central compared to 6, which is a decrease of 67%. Non-fatal shootings, 1 so far this year in the 7 day. And just so everybody's aware, the 7 day is going from September 30th to October 6th. 2 this time last year, the 7 day, which gives you a reduction of 50%. For the 28 day, there's been 4 non-fatal shootings compared to 2 this time last year, which is an increase of 100%. For robberies in the Central District, there's 11 this year for the 7 day, 13 compared to last year, which is a minus 15%. 28-day is 49 this year compared to 55 with a negative 11%. Aggravated assaults, there's 10 for this year for the 7-day compared to 22 this time last year, which is a minus 55%. And for the 28-day, I'm sorry, that was 7-day, I apologize. And for the 28-day, it's 42 compared to 52 with a minus 19%.
Thank you. Councilman Costello.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can we talk about what's going on in Upton right now, where things are at, specifically in Upton and McCullough Homes?
So right now what we have going on is we're all aware we've had 2 incidents up around in that general vicinity. One was at 1200 Druid Hill Avenue, which was a homicide by shooting that happened on the 28th of September, which was followed up by non-fatal shooting that happened on the 14th, which was 500 West Huffman. The issue with that is it is surrounding the homes. There's been deployment up in that area, and it's kind of quelled the violence. If the violence that was related to that was definitely directly targeted. There was video of the incident. I think Colonel Conway could probably speak better about how the investigation is shaping up in reference to that.
Got it. And I'm not putting this on the police department, but I certainly know that I don't need to impress upon anyone the severity of someone being shot and killed at 1:30 in the afternoon on a Friday in front of a Head Start center. And again, this isn't directed at the police department. This is me being very pissed off about the situation. And I hope that everyone at BPD, especially in the Central District, shares that same sense of outrage as we're moving forward, especially with what's going on in McCullough Homes. I know that Major Gaines and Captain Featherstone have dedicated resources there. And I hope that we'll see that continued police presence in the homes, if not an increase, because that type of violence is just unacceptable.
Mr. Costello, Councilman, hold on for 1 second. Colonel, if you could take the clicker and click the PDF down to the Central District for those in attendance, and then for those who are watching at home, how we do these is that we actually go district by district to look at the crime, and typically the council members that represent those areas, in addition to myself and the vice chair, will ask questions specific to those areas. Colonel. Colonel Conway, do you want to comment about any initiatives that you have going in that area, especially in reference to the homicide? And then also for you, Colonel Gertie, in reference to that homicide that the councilman just mentioned, do we know how many calls for service that we have that would have been pertinent to alerting you guys that there might be potential events preceding that incident?
So I can actually touch on that. As far as calls for service, the individual that I was actually involved in this incident, we had a lot of information on the victim. This individual actually got away from us quite a few times that day on that scooter that he was driving. So we knew about him. We were on him. He evaded us several times, and then upon evading us, then he is now got to be the victim of that homicide. So we knew him. We were on him, and we just couldn't catch him.
Thank you. Councilman Costello.
One other thing, I was on Penn Ave driving southbound on Friday at about 9:30, 10 p.m. I was on driving southbound on Penn Ave from Parks and People event on Friday night, and obviously there's a significant presence on North Avenue. This is something I brought up in the last 2 meetings, just that being a VRI zone. Are there things being done for those, specifically those neighborhoods directly east? So we're talking Madison Park, Marble Hill, and as we get into McCullough Homes, and then on the west side of that, you've got Councilman Pinkett's district in Sandtown, Winchester, and then south of that, Councilman Bullock in Harlem Park and Lafayette Square, to deal with the displacement as a result of those additional deployments. So I'm not complaining about the deployments. I just want to make sure that those neighborhoods on each side, a couple blocks, are being taken care of.
So absolutely, Councilman, and yes, and what we characterize those areas, they're called buffer zones. We put a lot of deployment inside of a particular zone. Then as a result, the activity gets pushed out into like a buffer zone area. We bring in the Maryland State, actually, and we don't bring them, but they come in, the Maryland State Police and Maryland Transportation Authority comes into the city, and we actually put them in these specific areas just for that reason. The incident that happened at 1200 Druid Hill at 1:30 in the afternoon, that was, like I say, we are outraged by that, and I think everybody wears his uniform is. That did catch us off of one of our zones. I talked to Major Gaines and Captain Featherstone, and we were deployed to the east.
No, I understand, and I know everyone's outraged. I'd be remiss if I didn't say it. Mr. Chair, I got one last question, quick. In terms of MTA police, something that Councilman Scott, Councilman Pinkett, and I have been talking about, especially on the Penn Ave corridor with Penn North and the Upton Metro Station, for me specifically with respect to Upton, are we getting any type of increase in deployment from MTA police? Do you feel like there's enough presence out there, or do we need more MTA police out there?
Well, sir, we certainly do have a presence from MTA. I think that where we are as an agency right now, I mean, we can use all the help we can. I know that the commissioner has reached out to several of the agency heads throughout the state to include MTA and others to get additional resources. I believe that we're still in, speaking about that. We have to have a meeting with some of the agencies that is going to be set very soon right now so that we can get those resources or additional resources to kind of help us in the crime fight. But from what we're seeing preliminarily, it does appear that we're going to get some help and some assistance from them. So that's something that we're moving on in future plans as well.
Thank you, Colonel and Deputy Commissioner. I would think that we wouldn't need to have to send a letter or make a formal request.
We have.
No, I understand, and I appreciate that.
Yes, sir.
Common sense would dictate that we wouldn't need to do that to get state agencies to cover their constitutional authority to provide public safety around those metro centers. So I appreciate that you all have taken the initiative to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Colonel, were you able to find out how many calls for service were there in there for there?
I don't have that information. I can get it to you, but I don't have that information with me right now, no.
Great. Also, it's come to my attention from some folks who've gotten some complaints. I know the council member may have gotten some of the similar ones, that there's a lot of, speaking of the buffer zone, a lot of activity being pushed into front of the Umar Boxing Center. So there may be an area that we might want to pay attention to as well.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Councilman Costello.
Is now the appropriate time to talk about Squeegee, or do you want to wait till we get to the southern?
Oh, the Central District is fine. We can just get done with the squeegees as soon as possible.
Thank you. Can you give an update on where things are at? I know we had a at-length conversation at the last hearing.
Yes, sir. So Colonel Russell has now been tasked from our agency and overseeing that effort, so he has a briefing for you on that subject matter.
Yes. So first of all, thank you. Good to see all of you. So as far as the Squeegee kids go, and I'm just getting involved in this a little bit, as far as the Squeegee kids go, we haven't made, as a police department, any arrests, but we've been collaborating with the mayor's office of Thank you, African American. So the district commanders have been working with them, and so Dr. Bunley and Andrew Knox, they've actually been going to these corners that we've been pointing out and saying we have issues with. We've been supplying transportation for them. They've been taking them offline to get them jobs, to tell them why they can't be doing this or whatever. So there's diversions, and I'm still waiting to get a report back from them to talk about what type of diversions, how many kids have you intercepted and talked to, and where we are. I just have not gotten that information. I'm newly put into this position. I did reach out to them earlier today, haven't got a response yet. I'd be more than happy to report back to you in reference to that. As far as we go, we've just made some arrests for panhandling, but nothing for squeegees. And that's not something we want to do anyway. We don't want to arrest the kids for squeegeeing.
Just let me add to that, and I just want to be very clear also. We know and understand the squeegee epidemic, and we understand that the needs as to why some of the young people are doing that. But also want to point out that there have been some instances where we've had some real aggressive type of situations occurring, windows getting broken out of cars, damaging people's vehicles. That type of is just not tolerated. So and I just want to just be very clear about that. That's putting it into a different lane or different perspective. That's malicious destruction of property. It's also can be construed or possibly even a threat. So those instances like that and incidents like that, we are taking very seriously, and we are moving towards identifying those individuals and working with, many times in these instances, people leave, and it's understandable why. So we're actually working to see how we can get those things reported, whether it's online or things of that nature there, so we can follow up, backtrack the times, try to identify some individuals that are doing this. There's some videos that have been out there that we're aware of, and we are trying to identify those individuals to get those individuals off the street. So it's kind of a twofold, but just want to be very clear, once an individual steps into the lane of destroying property or threatening somebody, that's a different matter than just someone, trying to clean your windshield. Just to be clear on that.
Agreed. And so I think in my estimation, the mayor's office approach with Dr. Bunley and Mr. Knox, that's the right approach for individuals that are not committing assaults. But when we talk about the assaults and just going clockwise in my district, starting at 6 o'clock, we're dealing with Hamburg and Russell. We had the individual who's a constituent of mine who had his back window smashed out with a metal pipe. Then we go up to all along the MLK corridor. It's most prevalent at MLK and McCullough. Then we get up to North Avenue and Mount Royal. Then we come back down the President Street corridor. We're starting to see them pop up on Charles Street, and folks are scared, right? And they're scared because they see TV reports of someone getting their back window smashed out. I would hope that folks aren't scared when they just see someone stand in the street who declines after that person declines their service, and they just walk away. Do we have an update on the investigation on the one that happened at Hamburg and Russell from last week?
Do we have anything? No, sir. I don't have that with me, but I do know that we have been looking into that.
Okay. Yeah. If you could please follow up with me, because I know we have HD screenshots of that gentleman's face. Yep. We need to get that individual off the street moving forward. And Mr. Chairman, one last thing to Colonel Russell's point about the panhandling and individuals who've been arrested for panhandling. Can you briefly touch on that? Or just so I have a better understanding of the specifics.
Yes, I believe there's been 5 arrests year to date. Most of them, I believe, was in that MLK corridor. All of them are pending but one. That panhandler, if I remember correctly, was put into some type of diversion program by the courts.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my last comment is just, if we could ask Central District Command, I've already had this conversation with the major and the captain, to have shift commanders let the folks on patrol know and just remind them every shift about these intersections, because these intersections are real problems. So I think, it's important for citizens to see some type of police presence,
absolutely,
even if it's just a police officer driving by, to make sure that folks feel safe. So.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Last thing on Central District before we move to the Southeast. Actually, Colonel, I was able to pull up the calls for service for the 1200 block of Drew Hill online on the open data database, and there actually was, I see a call for armed person 8 days before, and there's been several calls for narcotics throughout the year. Can you follow up with us to see what happened with those calls so that we can make sure that this wasn't something that we could have prevented with further action?
Absolutely.
On to this. Go ahead, Colonel.
Sorry. So before we go to the next district, I'd like to say that I have to be very careful about what I say specifically about investigations, because it puts my detective at jeopardy and so also the public. So some things I just can't, I can give you an overview of it, but we were talking specifically about that case on Drew Hill, and we have things that would actually make that situation worse if I was to say anything.
Yep.
So I just want to let you know that it's not that I'm not being transparent, but I just want to make it clear that we can't say certain things about investigations, especially if they're open.
Understand. Colonel, Southeast District.
So Southeast District, for the 7-day, there's been no homicides compared to no homicides this time last year. For the 28-day, there's been no homicides compared to 3 this time last year, which is a decrease of 100%. Year to date, the Southeast is showing 10 compared to 21, with a decrease of 52% for homicides. For non-fatals, there's been 2 for the 7-day in the 2018 period compared to 1 this time last year, which is an increase of 100%. 7 in the 28-day compared to 3, which is a plus 133%. And year to date, 36 compared to 23, which is a plus 57%. For robberies in the Southeast District, there's been 13 compared to 12. this time on the 7-day, which is a +8. 77 in the 28-day compared to 99 this time last year, which is a -22%. 688 compared to 824, which is a -17%. Aggravated assaults, it is 13 compared to 13. 53 compared to 52 in the 28-day, which is a +2. And 479 compared to 513, which is a -7%.
Thank you. Can you, who has the clicker? We're off. You're off on the screen. We're not on the Southeast District. Councilman Cohen.
You doing?
It will be up a lot, Deputy. Scroll it. Deputy, if you have, thank you, Mr. Vetta. Welcome back to your old job. Councilman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Gentlemen, I remain deeply concerned about burglaries and robberies in the Southeast District. While there is a slight decline, it remains way too much. Folks are afraid even in their homes. There was some communication put out about making sure the mail slots are covered. I think that's right, but we also have heard that people are picking locks. I convened a meeting this morning of 4 of my residents that had all experienced a burglary on Curley Street, 3 of them within the same night. What I found most concerning about this meeting that we convened is that 2 of them had received no communication and had no idea where the police department was, and were it not for this meeting where we brought the sergeant detective and the community members together, they wouldn't have known what was going on. So I think there's a real communication problem. I've also heard that in the effort to get more officers on patrol, that detectives have been pulled. And so there's less investigation happening. And so when I hear these numbers and when I hear from my constituents and they are telling me again and again and again that I'm getting robbed, I'm getting burglarized, and I hear that there's less investigation happening, that is deeply concerning. I think, at least from my perspective, when we say we want more officers in patrol, at least for me, we're talking about the folks who are doing civilian duties. That's who I want out there walking the streets. Detectives need to be doing detective work and following up on these violent crimes. The other thing I would say that's been concerning to me, just in walking around and talking to my neighbors, is the amount of times I'm still seeing officers sitting in cars, watching the neighborhood, just seemingly not engaged. And I'm able to walk around. I don't have a gun or a badge. I've never been hurt. And what my community members, what our residents are crying out for is for your officers to be out of their cars, engaging with the citizens. Constitutional policing, but engaging. And again, it's been disturbing that I continuously see officers sitting in cars, seemingly disengaged from the crime fight.
Yes, sir. So first let me say, in terms of the investigations, we'll start there. So, we have spoken about this matter. We've also known that Captain Brown has been engaged over at that district. There's been some email correspondence as to what we're putting in place to deal with the things that we saw over there. In addition to that, let me just also say that there are not less investigations occurring. There are actually, you're right, we did move officers from the districts into the patrol, but there are protocols or policies and procedures in place that to ensure that these cases are being followed up. There's a supervisor who, in every one of the 9 districts, who's responsible to ensure that those follow-ups are being conducted. That's why it's a little alarming to me to hear that no follow-up is occurring, and we're definitely going to look into that. And why that's occurring in the Southeast District, we will definitely look into following up that. And I'm sure the Chief of Patrol has that on his things to do list. But there are not less investigations occurring, and there shouldn't be. So all of these cases, whether it's an aggravated assault or burglary, which are down in the district levels, those cases should be getting the attention. And the protocol and the procedures are is that those investigations go to the day work officer for follow-up, contacts, and all those type of things. So if those things aren't occurring, we're definitely going to take a look at that as to why. In addition to that, in terms of unless Colonel Garrity, you wanted to weigh in terms of...
no, sir, I agree 100%. That's the first time I'm hearing about that, and it's definitely going to be addressed.
Yes, the second part is the message for patrol is clear, and that message is that we should be outside of our cars. Now, there are some instances where officers have to sit in cars, and I'm not making excuses, whether they're doing reports and things like that on their data terminals that they have to do, but the message from my office, from the Chief of Patrol's office, from the Commissioner's office is to be engaged. We need to be outside of our cars. We've been seeing, even in our inspections and things that we put in place, officers at times, even driving down the street with their windows up is inappropriate. So we're looking and tackling all those things, and we're holding those district commanders and those shift commanders accountable to ensure that those things are taking place. You should be seeing officers outside of their cars. And we are doing everything that we can in terms of putting inspection components in place. We have, even on the night commander, we have every morning the colonel and I get a text message at 5 a.m. about all of the inspections that he's done for the night before. So we are very serious about that. We understand the importance of citizen and community engagement as it relates to our relationships with the community, and it's also a way for us to improve our service to the citizens, because we know that obviously this is something important for the city, and this is something that we definitely have to do. So it is one of our kind of hallmarks to be more engaging with the city, and those are the things that we're going to continue to do.
Mr. Chair, can I jump in on this?
Councilman Burnett.
I don't want to pile on, but this, I think the councilman really hit something. This past Saturday, I worked with about 25 volunteers to do a community cleanup on Frederick Avenue. And we had green vests. We were out there cleaning it up, engaging with people, talking to people, chatting it up with business owners. And one of my constituents came over to me and says, "Councilman, this is what I'm talking about." So we're literally standing next to a police car, and the police officer's in there texting on his phone, and sat there for a good 30 minutes. And I just wanted to wait and see how long the officer would not get out the car, there was plenty of trash. You could have came out, and it would have been a good photo op, I would imagine, to have somebody come and help out a community group that's doing service. But, it was really disappointing that in the times that we are, that officer didn't feel that this is a perfect opportunity for me to engage with a group of people who are trying to make the neighborhood better. And for me, it was just like, this is exactly what people are frustrated with, because they feel like, all right, we're glad you're here. In that particular corridor, later that day, there were 2 shootings. But I think people's lack of inspiration that the department can get things done are moments like that, where there is an opportunity to get out and engage with the community. And in addition, there was a shooting later right on that stretch. So they feel like, all right, well, what were you here doing other than just sitting in the car? Right. And not that, I don't know that officer's shift, if they left right afterwards, if they were, all of that, I think doesn't matter much. But in the greater scheme of things, it's like that perception that my constituent had is that these folks don't care.
Yes, sir.
And that's the message it sends. What I'll follow up with is, if constituents see that kind of thing, obviously I was there, but what are they supposed to do? Who are they supposed to call to inquire about that? Because if this is the first I'm hearing that, because I've heard different, that in some instances the officers are assigned to be at a corner, stay in the vehicle, and maybe you can explain, how that would differentiate between foot patrol. But that's a frustration that people have, is that, yes, they want the presence, and they were thankful to see an officer there, and have seen an increased presence on that corridor, on Edmondson Avenue, and a few others. But I guess that extra step of getting out and chatting people up, hey, thank you for doing this kind of thing would have just been nice. And the officer didn't know who I was. That's fine. But, you know, for me, those are the opportunities that I have, that I'm not walking around in a suit. I'm just looking like everybody else, and I'm seeing, all right, this is exactly what my communities are seeing. This is a problem.
Go ahead.
So I'll touch on that. So no officer is told to go sit at a corner in his or her vehicle with the windows up and texting on their phone for unordinary amounts of time. No officer is told to do that. I will say this, I can't comment on that particular incident because I wasn't there. Also, I would take your word for it. You were there, so I will take your word for it. So when they're told to go into certain areas, they're told to be in contact with the community. Now, I can't vouch and tell you about every single Baltimore City police officer and his or her, how they're going to be. I can tell you that I understand that it's an issue, and it's been an issue since I was a major of the Southeast District, about getting these younger officers involved, getting them to talk to people, and we need to come up with something to get these officers how to talk to a person face to face. If I put a phone in their hand, they'll sit there and text you or tweet and the other things that this newer generation does and are very good at. They're very good at. But having a face-to-face conversation with a person, you would think is pretty easy. But to them, it's a little bit different. But that doesn't excuse them from sitting in their vehicle or her vehicle and just absolutely doing absolutely nothing other than sitting on the corner. Again, I can't comment exactly why they were there. I can only suggest that they were there because they took it too literally. Hey, be up here, make sure nothing happens. If something happens, it's your rear end. And that's just, I think sometimes we take this a little too literal when the message gets down to the troops.
But
Can I just add on the back of that, sir?
go ahead.
Just real quick, and if you could tell maybe the colonel and the deputy offline, I don't know if I'm assuming you got tag or something. So if you could definitely pass that on, because, you know, 20, 30 years ago, a presence made a difference, right? Today that doesn't work. You got to put engaged in front of it. It's got to be an engaged presence. Just showing up is not enough, and we understand that, and that's what the colonel was saying. It has to be an engaged presence, and that's the piece where they have to get out of the car. We are having difficulties with that, but we're going to get there eventually.
And so I guess the follow-up on, one, what can citizens do when they see that kind of thing? Two, what can be done from the department to do, whether it's a spot check, you know, if you're sending an officer to a corner and you want to test, are they literally doing this? I mean, yes, you pulling up in the black SUV, they probably put the phone down and get out the car and look like they're doing something. But if you walk in civilian gear in that area that they're supposed to be and doing a regular spot check to see if they're actually engaging people, because I mean, people are going to say it. They're saying it in CRC meetings, they're saying it in community meetings, and I'm not always there to vouch for it. And yes, I have a great relationship with my command staff, but that's not the day-to-day life of a citizen in Baltimore City that we really are the ones that have to be impressed upon. It's not up to me to, you know, get that quick response. It's, you know, but that accountability piece, what are we doing to spot check, to hold folks accountable, to show up when they're not expecting it, so that they don't know when it's coming, and are held accountable? Because I think that's when we talk about violence and people feeling confident. If they don't feel like the officers care, they don't feel like the city cares, your investigations aren't going to mean anything, because people aren't going to come forward to say anything because they don't trust you. And you know this, but it seems like we've been having these meetings, we've been having these hearings, we've been saying it, the consent decree says it, the media is saying it, people are saying it, but it just seems like the message isn't getting through.
So
Councilman, Deputy, before you start, I just wanted to make something clear, because we've had this incident with my now former commander where I caught someone sleeping, and he was able to look on his laptop and see exactly where the person was and how long they've been sitting there. So if that's the case, I don't think that we should be even having this conversation anymore. If we can see where people, if commanders can see where people are in their cars and they've been sitting for a long period of time, then action should be taken. If that person has to be put out on the foot to make sure that they get the message that they can't just sit in the car, and I don't mean on foot just standing there, I mean on foot actually walking and engaging with people, then that's what needs to happen. I think that in the past, when you didn't have the technology, we can have an excuse for this happening, but not today, when you can actually see as a district commander how long someone's been idling in the same spot for hours on end.
Sure.
And Councilman Dorsey.
And I want to just kind of add another point to this is that while it's common to also to think about, we want to see people walking around, we want to see officers engaging with people. I want to see people out with a radar gun or LiDAR gun, as the case may be. Like, that's what I hear mostly is like, why do I see, and like, I have to echo the sentiments of my colleagues here. It's like, nobody I ever speak to in my district has any sense that any cop is ever getting out of their car for anything except, to walk up to somebody's front door when they're responding to a call. Nobody. And what I hear from people is our district would be safer if they would at least spend 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes during the course of their entire shift just getting out of the car with that LiDAR gun. And I've been talking to the Northeast District, and they told me for months and months and months they didn't even have one. Last time I checked, I happened to be at the district, and they said they finally had one, but it took the guy 20 minutes to find it, and it was obviously tucked away somewhere in the district, and because he didn't even know it existed. So we're not even setting them up to be able to go out and do productive things like this. We're basically telling them the only option you have is be in your car or be standing or walking and talking to some people. But there are other productive things that can be happening, but we're not even providing them with facilities to be able to do some of these other things. And that is the number one thing I hear from people in my district is how come there's no traffic enforcement whatsoever. And I personally can't tell you the last time I seen it, and you talk to anybody in Northeastern District, and they'll tell you, well, that's Steve Angelini, that's his thing, and the only reason he was doing it was because he purchased his own equipment. The department wouldn't even provide him the equipment to operate that traffic enforcement, and he's been on light duty since he got hit by a car for I don't know how long ago. So I know that nothing has happened in probably a year and a half. None whatsoever.
Yes, sir. So
thank you. And Deputy Commissioner, we're going to go to Councilman Middleton, and then I'm going to remind my colleagues that we're going to stay on district-specific stuff until the end of the hearing, and then we can have follow-up. Councilman Middleton.
This is just basically a citywide. I concur with my colleagues. I mean, we could each sit here and name all kinds of incidents that we encounter as we do activities within our communities, and you say it over and over again, it's about engagement, and I definitely agree, and I think we all in here agree, but for some reason, it's not getting to the officers, the ones that are on the streets. And I was at a meeting last night where the mayor's office of African American male engagement, they're really starting to iron out their plan, which I think they introduced this in Park Heights last night. And listening to that plan, I think it's an opportune time for you to really partner and engage with them, because they're the ones that are going to go on the streets and do a number of these things. They're going to be reaching these corners. They're going to be going to and reaching the returning citizens, the people that are the sexual and gender minorities, children, youth, and adults. They're partnering with other agencies and organizations. The juvenile justice system is involved. The faith base is involved. The police department needs to be a part of that. And I hear you say, you're saying things that the way things should be, but we're not seeing any action. And action needs to start right away. I mean, there's so many activities that are going on in all the communities. The police department are on shifts. They need to get involved right away. It's not implementing something a week, a month from now. It has to start now.
Yes, ma'am. I would say that we are engaged with the community. We have a great working relationship with Dr. Bunley. We certainly are part of some of the initiatives that he puts forth. We meet at our city stat meeting and share ideas with him and have an open dialogue about that and other matters that pertain to the city as well. So, and in addition to that, we still are continuing with our pathway to the community, which happens also in the VRI meetings every morning. Every commander at that morning meeting speaks about what efforts they're doing within the community for that specific day. So the community engagement, we are there. We have commanders that are coming here on the weekends, that are events that are occurring. That's part of their job. So I would just say that we are doing that. Can we improve? Absolutely, we can improve.
And it's not about getting men or women off the streets. It's about providing those services, because a lot of the people out there on the streets need a job, they need mental services, they need, you know, it's a whole bunch of wraparound services. And you as an organization have to be involved, and we as a council don't see the involvement. We have to go to the community meetings and we listen over and over again about officers sitting in cars watching drug activity, watching fights, watching, you know, just watching things. I have seen it happen and get out of my car and try to stop certain things. So it's like, where is the disconnect? And that's where the distrust starts to happen with the community. They're wondering, well, why are you, you know, are you afraid? I mean, it's a lot of things that go through people's minds on why these officers are just sitting in these cars, and it's citywide. It's not just by district.
Thank you,
stop there.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Cohen.
I defer to my colleague, Councilman Sneed.
So,
Councilman
thank you.
Sneed.
So I'm curious because I've been asking for cameras in certain area right there on that Montford and Jefferson corridor, and I feel like there's been 3 shootings, 1 attempted. Crime happens there constantly. Nothing changes. So I'm just curious about how can we, because neighbors have asked the same question, why is it that, you know, there's outrage in one community and they get cameras, but they don't get the camera where there's been murders right in front of this door, right in front of this location. Drug dealing still happens, and it's no change. It literally is no change. I think it may be one officer out there now who sits in a car while drug dealing is happening right there. So my question is, how can we get cameras or something for this corner where murders have happened and attempted murder has?
Councilwoman, I'm going to defer that question to Director Vedder from the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice. I know that he is involved with the camera expansion. Mr. Vedder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Councilwoman. So, as you know, the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice is involved with leading the City Watch Partnership, which is a partnership of our office, the police department, Baltimore City Information Technology, our vendors, our other agency partners like HABC, Department of Transportation. You know, I've testified, you know, in council before about the kind of the nature of the program and its budget.
With all due respect, we have had 3 murders. I'm going to say it again. We have had 3 murders on this corner and 1 attempted murder, and nothing has changed. And so the outpour is when we're in other communities, they get the cameras, and we have not. Tell me a corner that has had 3 murders and 1 attempted murder. And I'll gladly like, oh, you win this one. But I don't think there's a corner that has this, and it's no cameras. It's nothing has changed.
So as I've testified previously, we're not budgeted for network expansion each year. Unfortunately, you know, despite having a robust City Watch camera network, you know, when you take the radius of each of the 800 or so cameras that we have throughout the city, it still only covers a very small percentage of the city's total landmass. And very, you know, I think it's frustrating to us all that there are many areas of the city that are not covered by cameras.
I understand, but show me where there has been 3 murders and 1 attempted murder where it's not paid attention to. That's my only, like, show me where there's a camera that there's been 3 murders and 1 attempted murder and nothing is, and it still sits
So
there.
I would note that you know, we did get some funds for expansion this year. We're currently going through an expansion of the network by about 60 cameras. We prioritized those networks in areas that had high concentrations of homicides and shootings like that.
So
we were
3
not able to
murders
get
and
to
1
every
attempted
area.
is not considered a problem.
And I would further note that
Is it not considered a problem where you had 3 murders and 1
it is
attempted?
absolutely a problem, and cameras are part of the overall solution. Cameras can help as a deterrent. They can help collect evidence if they do catch a crime happening. They are not the end-all, be-all. They are part of a solution. They're another tool. They help increase kind of eyes on the street with the real-time monitors that we have out of City Watch. We want to continue expanding this network. We've added 30-some cameras, I think, to the network already this year. That's the most number of cameras added to the network since 2012.
It's sad because here again, this area still, you added 3 cameras and still we've had 3 murders and 1 attempted murder, and this area still doesn't get one of the cameras.
So just a comment on that, chat, and Councilwoman
Colonel,
Snead.
before you talk, Mr. Vedder, I think what I'm going to ask you to do is if you could brief all of the members of the council, starting with the committee, on the proposed camera expansion. I think that would be good for everyone.
We can and one more thing. We can absolutely do that. We've provided the expansion locations already. We can provide them again. The last thing I'll note is that we do maintain a list of camera requests. So, Councilwoman Snead, we've had that request recorded since it was initially made. Each new camera is a little construction project. They're connected to the city's fiber network. It's expensive. It takes some time. The camera program is not on-demand cameras, and unfortunately it takes some time. We're doing the best that we can to expand this network. That is certainly a priority location. Unfortunately, we've got lots of areas where we experience violence over and over again without cameras. We're doing everything we can to fill all of those gaps. We'll be requesting increased funding going forward, and we'll work with you and the community on that.
So who sits in the room that determines where the cameras go?
So for the expansion project that we're doing currently, we worked with the police department to come up with those locations. Essentially we looked at where current camera locations are, and then we overlaid violent crime, and then we worked with the BPD district commanders on their priority locations. And then we also have to overlay kind of proximity to the fiber network. So we need to make sure it's feasible as well. Depending on how close a location is to the fiber network, a new camera can cost anywhere from $15,000 to $50,000 or more, depending on how much construction is required. And that's the reason why you have some of these underserved areas is because expansion to those areas has been cost prohibitive in the past. So, the funds that we have now have allowed us to address some of those areas that have been traditionally unserved, such as the Milton and Montford area, which I think is in your district, which is, we've got 7 new cameras online there. We've got 9 or so new cameras going on in the Oliver community, also kind of historically impacted by gun violence, unserved by the City Watch program. So that's how we go about it. We look at where we are, we look at where crime is happening, where we don't have cameras, and then we figure out how much it costs, and we determine whether or not it's financially feasible. And certainly going forward, I don't think that it's really happened in the past necessarily, that we've kept a consolidated list of all requests that come in from the community, that come in from BPD commanders, that come in from the council. That's something that we're doing now. We've had that location you're speaking about on that list for some time, and we're going to address it.
Thank you.
Colonel.
So to answer another question about what we're doing up in that area, the eastern and the southeast run together up on that border. We all know we've called it the Miami Street area because it impacts both districts, eastern plus the southeast. Yes, without question, it is ridiculous that we keep getting violence in those couple of blocks, without question. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me because I wasn't prepared to tell you gun numbers, but I can tell you this, that the officers are out there targeting individuals with guns. We've made several arrests up there. We've had numerous handguns recovered in and around that area. So it isn't like we recognize it, but I'll say this, the resources are limited. And when you're dealing with that area, yes, without question, you would think, why don't the police have a flag planted here? But there's other areas that, like you're well aware of, that we get bounced around, that we have to take care of these issues. I would love to have an officer on foot in every single one of our areas that needs police. But the reality is we don't have the manpower in patrol to do that. We just don't.
So because this is the question that we keep getting in these CRC meetings is, hey, there was a shooting that just happened. The same drug dealers are back on the corners at the same location that the shooting just happened. It's like no one is seeing anything from a resident. It's like the officers sit there, you see the exchange, but nothing happens. Like, it would seem like, because I guess we don't have the resources, that this area would be like wiped clean because a shooting just happened, you're back out there. It's like no regard. It's like disrespectful almost to neighbors when they see this.
Ma'am, we are responsive to violence, and I think that everyone here in the room knows that. I mean, that is our top priority here in the city. If there's an incident of violence, of a homicide and shooting, our entire criminal investigation division and the patrol division that's responsible in that area are responsive to that. There are after actions and things that occur within the community. There's also in instances like in certain neighborhoods that warrant long-term or mid-term investigations to be able to root out the root causes of things that's going in there. We understand the things about the recidivist rate and things like that have occurred, but we are responsive as to what we need to be doing within specific violent areas. We plan and strategize for these things on a daily basis, and those deployments are fluid as well. So I would just say that in terms of how we are responding and what we feel as though our actions are, I think we are definitely on point with that. Is there room for improvement in some instances? Yes. Is there room for camera technology that we know that we probably need to put in certain areas in the city? Yes, ma'am. But we're working hard to do all those things.
We're going to move to the Eastern, which is also Councilwoman Sneed. So, Councilwoman, if you can hold for 1 second. We'll go to the Eastern District. Colonel.
Eastern District. So we'll start out 7-day. There's been no homicides compared to no homicides this time last year, 7-day period. 3 homicides in the 28-day compared to 3 this time last year, which is an uneven mark. 29 homicides this year compared to 44 this time last year, which is a reduction of 34%. For non-fatal, 7-day, it's 2 this year compared to 3. 28 days, 6 compared to 7. And then year-to-date, 75 to 71, which is a plus 6%. Robbery, 7 days, 7 compared to 5, which is an uptick of 40%. 27 in the 28 compared to 39, which is a negative 31. And year-to-date, 311 compared to 352 this time last year. For ag assaults, 14 compared to 10, which is a plus 40%. 48 compared to 50, which is a negative 4%. And 520 compared to 531, which is a minus 2%.
Councilwoman, the floor is yours.
So we just did a walk last week around Port and Hoffman, Milton and Hoffman, and one of the seniors there said, I mean, it's constant all-day activity. It's nonstop. And I was beat down because at this point I just don't know what to do. I'm getting phone calls. We're going to the meetings. And one of the seniors said, a vet paid his dues, lived in the community a long time. But he said, Shannon, I put Ajax on my steps. And when I came out, one of the guys still was on my steps. He's like, I got Ajax on my steps. Like, why are you sitting here? And the young dude told him, I'll smack you in your face. And like that type of disrespect is happening in our communities. And it's happening, I feel like, because it's no regard, and then they go back and say it's because of the consent decree. Is that true? Like, is it no respect and no one returning because this consent decree is?
So respect is something that is taught. So I can't explain human behavior when an individual out on the street wants to threaten an elderly person with violence. I can tell you this, there are hundreds of officers in this city that are putting their lives on the line every single day and night out there getting out of their vehicles and actually making arrests and doing these things. Yes, we do have incidents where we find officers sitting doing bad things, but I can guarantee you, I don't have the numbers with me, but I will definitely get you the enforcement numbers that we do as an agency, especially within the patrol division. Yes, I'm aware that it's not all about enforcement, but we are law enforcement, and we will enforce the laws, and it is something that I feel very passionate about, but I cannot explain human behavior when it comes to somebody doing that.
I guess what my question is, what do we do? Because they're literally sitting on this man's steps. He's calling 911. He's calling 311. And it's like nothing, no one clears out. And it's mobs. Like when we walked in, Charlene said, "Oh, I see why, like they're outraged." And I'm like, yeah. Like it is horrible. I don't know, because it's so many vacants, of course that adds to it, but it is so disrespectful to see this. It is outrageous. I mean, it's not like 2 here, it's like 10, literally. It's 10 here, literally 10 on this corner. It's like crazy if something happens.
Meg, is there a strong association there, or at least a group of people that would love to come together? I know you're meeting with them, but
yes.
So offline, I would love to be able to bring the community aspect into it and maybe show them a few tactics and even walk with them a couple of times. I've walked with that community in the past. I'm sorry that they've dialed back a little bit, because it's got to be consistent, and obviously it's not. One of the things that we all know, the police can't be there 24/7, especially in this modern day, but the community is going to be there 24/7. So there's some tactics I would love to be able to come in with my staff, teach them, walk with them on a regular basis, and what you'll find is that engaged presence that doesn't always have to be police. That's what our community has to understand. Doesn't have to always be police, but we could teach them non-confrontationally how to make all that stuff go away. So if you would just give me a call later, I would absolutely love to work with you. All right.
Thank you.
Colonel, Councilwoman, are you done? Yes. So the last homicide in the Eastern was on the 29th of September, correct? In the 2500 block of East Biddle?
Yes.
So just looking at that area, so and I've only looked at one, but there were at least 50 calls for service on that block between September the 8th and actually as of earlier today. Many of them seem to be this area seems to be an area that's important to Major Wells and his individuals, because a lot of them are for someone calling out foot patrol or calling out as a hotspot check. So it seems that the police department is in that area. Can you talk about, and even you can follow up with Councilwoman Sneed and myself about what we were doing in that area prior to the incident and after, to see where the gaps are and where we could either partner with the community or other agencies to figure out what's going on there? Because it seems to me, and I know that you can check to see exactly what was being done by those officers who have been spending quite a lot of bit of time in that particular block to see what's going on, to give the councilwoman and her the councilwoman and her neighborhood some relief.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And then also for the Eastern District, which is very concerning to me, is that there seemed to be a uptick in street robberies, 75% in the 7-day and 19% in the 28-day, and actually a 2% decrease year to date. Are we seeing patterns in the Eastern? Colonel Conway, is there a specific place that the councilwoman and the other folks that represent the Eastern District, Councilman Stokes is not here, should be alerting their residents, getting out information, figuring out ways to partner with the patrol officers to prevent these from happening?
Yes, so you are seeing a couple patterns. So you have one is a hack pattern. We have 6 cases. The suspect is providing rides to the victims in a white vehicle and robbing them of their property.
What kind of white vehicle?
Is a black male. He's using a black handgun, and he utilizes a white sedan. We've had one on 726. We've had one on 817. We had one on 95, 98. Well, actually 2 on 98, and one on 106. It looks like that Saturday It looks like he's hitting mostly on Saturdays and on the weekend. So we're definitely seeing, and most of them are of course, street robberies.
And are they in a particular place on the east side?
So 2200 Guilford, 2100 Garrard, 3300 Duncanwood, and 3200 Towanda, 3101 Swan Drive, and 400 West Saratoga. So only hit one time in the eastern,
and then it'll
but
go across town.
It's the whole area.
Yes,
but we're seeing that across the board. If you take a look at other districts as well, if we talk about the majority of the city, we're looking at pattern cases where they start out as robberies and ended up as shootings. We have 3 instances where that's happening now with 3 different suspects.
So, Deputy, and Colonel, if you can send that information out to us so that we can disseminate that in a way that the citizenry can use that information, but also, Deputy, for you, I think it'd be important for us to, if we know that information, the quicker we can get that out to folks, I think it will help us. Yes, sir. Thank you. Any other questions about the Eastern District? To the Northeast District, gentlemen. Don't everybody smile all at once. Colonel.
So for the Northeast District, for 7 days, there's been 2 homicides compared to 3 this time last year. In the 28-day, 5 compared to 6. In the year-to-date, 29 compared to 33. For non-fatal shootings in the 7-day, it's been 2 compared to 8, 5 compared to 18 in the 28, and 62 compared to 64. I just want to say this for everybody to hear, that Natalie Preston, Captain Preston, is doing a remarkable job in that district when it comes to the gun violence. But it's also with the assistance of some outside agencies, outside divisions, that's really clamped down on that district, which was actually, we all know that district was actually leading some of the east side in violence. Her robbery numbers, or the robbery numbers in the Northeast, on the 7-day, 14 compared to 32, 55 compared to 92 for 28, and year-to-date, 565 compared to 712. Yes, sir. And aggravated assaults, 11 compared to 27 in the 7-day, 54 compared to 77 in the 28-day, and 535 compared to 646. So that district is seeing, I mean, she's doing it, and I'm probably, jinxing myself, but they're doing an outstanding job in the Northeast, and with the assistance of the Major Crimes Unit and some outside federal agencies, they've really made an impact up in that district as far as violence.
And thank you, and Colonel, you know that I believe that Captain Preston should be the mayor of the Northeast District. I actually find it ridiculous that the largest district in the city with the most people in the city actually only has 1 commander. And if Acting Commissioner Tuggle was here, I would tell him again that I don't care if he has to demote somebody. If there's no numbers, then there are people who are commanders that were removed from districts for not being up to par. There are people who were commanders who are maybe in part of other investigations that Internal Affairs are doing, and maybe they need to be demoted. But the largest district in the city should not be without a full-time commander, especially someone that is actually what the citizens have been asking for, someone that grew up in that district, whose families grew in that district, who went to college, who is trying to get a master's degree. And we keep asking and saying that we need these type of people to be in our police department, but then we treat them differently than we treat other folks who are not as deserving. So can we start? Oh, Deputy.
I would just say, sir, the commissioner and obviously myself are very aware of that, and that we are going to be making some changes or improvements, not improvements, that's the wrong word, but we're certainly going to address the districts that are represented by 1 commander as opposed to most districts obviously having 2.
Thank you. Colonel, can we go to the last homicide in Northeast, 2800 Lake Avenue? And I also would like to thank Colonel Conway and his shop for all the work that they've done in the Northeast, helping to bring some peace to some areas that were being overtaken by violence.
You're talking about 3300, I didn't hear what?
Lake Avenue.
Lake Avenue? I think I can let probably Colonel Conway discuss that a little. I don't want to divulge any information.
Colonel.
Yeah, I think we can talk about deployment, but as far as the case is concerned, I don't want to talk about specifics. I'm sorry.
So yeah, I brought that up because this is, as you guys know, I spent a lot of time driving around the Northeast District. This was an instance actually where I had just talked to Councilwoman Sneed about the extra resources that were deployed along the Bel Air Road corridor, and then literally immediately after they removed this incident happened. So I wanted to see if we had any information that the councilwoman could share, that you could share, that you could share with that neighborhood, and Councilman Dorsey as well, because it's close to his district as well.
I'd be happy to talk offline.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
100%. Thank you.
And then Councilman Dorsey, actually, next. Go ahead.
How many auto crashes have we had in the Northeast District?
How many
Auto crashes.
involving police officers or in general?
In general.
I don't have that number. I can get it for you. I mean, that would actually be a very hard pull for me to get you that information.
How do we track that information?
We get a report every morning on accidents from AIU.
Crashes.
Yes.
From where?
AIU, from tactical. Yeah.
Colonel, for the general public, can you say what the acronym AIU stands for? No, not you, Colonel. Colonel Conway, sir, for the general public, say what AIU stands for, please.
It's Accident Investigation Unit. So we get the number of accidents for us, not for the general public. So I can't tell you how many accidents actually happen, because you have accidents that actually go to AIU and you have accidents that officers handle on the street. Accidents that happen within the department, we can tell you that.
If you're referring to like a certain intersection, absolutely we can get you that information. But the general, for the Northeast District total, the amount of accidents, that would take some time. We could get you the number, but that's going to take some time to research.
We just have to pull a reporting. We can do a query in terms of the accidents for a specific geography or district.
So I'm asking this question because it's my sense that this stuff is not getting reported and tracked accurately.
And that, I'm sorry,
and I'm saying that because I've done a recent query with the Office of Risk Management, where they have access to all of the records, and for a year and a half, 2 years, I asked various city agencies to try to help provide me information about one specific area that I know to be a location of frequent crashes. If you're familiar with the Northeast, the area between Urban Avenue and 32nd Street on Harford Road, crashes happen at both of those intersections and frequently in that one block in between there. For example, right now there's a tree bent over, leaning over into the street next to a missing section of fence. Things that, like the crash that caused that, probably happen 4 to 8 times a year in that area. And as far back as that query goes, from 2010 to the present, there are only records of 4 crashes ever having taken place there. Baltimore City has the worst drivers in the United States. We have 370% the crash rate of the rest of the state of Maryland. It is imperative that we track crash data properly, and that starts with whoever the first officer is to respond. I know for a fact that I have been involved in numerous crashes, once where I was hit intentionally by a driver while I was on my bike. No report of that exists in the system. I know that reports are very, very consistently not made about crashes, even when an officer takes the time to show up to a scene. And this impacts our crash data that gets reported out to the state and then is then relied on by our Department of Transportation in order to create a safer environment for all of us in the city. And so I need to know how the department is going to do a little bit better to make sure that these things go recorded properly.
Yes, sir. So I think first to start off in terms of what the criteria is for us in terms of agency and how we report accidents. Obviously, it would need to be, in other words, an officer being called to the scene of an accident and obviously doing their preliminary investigation. What would warrant a report would be if there is, obviously, if it's a fatality in which the traffic unit would come out and handle those fatalities, or very serious, what we call Signal 31s, as well as any extensive property damage, which would require the vehicle to be towed. And then another criteria is obviously if it's injury to any one of the parties that's in the car accident. Outside of that,
But not if city property is being damaged?
well, city property is noted in the reports in terms of when those incidents meet those criterias. There should be included in there in those reports when property is damaged to the city as well. I just think that we need to probably look at that in terms of what our current coding is. I understand your question. So, for example, in instances where there is an accident, and in your particular incident, I don't know.
Can we call them crashes? They're not accidents, they're crashes. This is the Associated Press accepted terminology for this. We should be calling them crashes. We design an environment to encourage them to happen. They're crashes. They don't happen by accident. We design the environment to encourage them on purpose.
Yes, sir.
We might as well call them on purposes.
Yes, sir. The crashes.
Thank you.
In your particular case, a report should have been generated for that because you were injured as a result of that accident, that crash. Is that correct?
That's
so
correct.
A report should have been written on file, and why it was not, or whether or not it was misfiled, we'll have to obviously look at that if you would like us to do so. But in terms of, I understand it because we actually visited this question before a couple sessions ago in terms of the city's damages which would occur in, for example, if a street light was knocked over, and how we are capturing that data. I would say that I know that I spoke to Major Corbett about that. Unfortunately, he's not here. His father passed, and their funeral was today. I have to follow up with him in terms of what his investigation yielded for that response, but I know that he was charged with looking at that and seeing how we can improve as an agency to begin to capture that. It could be something as simple as how we are looking at it in CAD to be able to get the right, because what happens is if an officer gets it and he doesn't write a report, may give it an oral code. Just say that the complaint was abated, but we're not capturing the crash data that you're requesting here. So it's probably a coding thing, Colonel Worley, that we have to look at moving forward. But again, I'd like to double back with Major Corbett just to see where he is on his investigation.
I'd be very happy to be able to work with the department to improve this reporting. I think
Sure.
that it's really important, for us to be able to make informed decisions about where to invest in improvements to safety in our transportation environment.
Yes, sir. So we can,
Deputy,
Lieutenant Colonel Worley and
can we set up a meeting with
Sure.
Councilman, myself, yourself, and Colonel Worley, whoever, to address this issue?
and Major Corbett as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
On to the Northern District, Colonel.
Excuse me. Northern District, so for 7 days, they've had 1 homicide compared to 1 this time last year. 3 in the 28-day compared to 1 this time last year. 18 year-to-date compared to 21. Non-fatal shootings, 0 against 0. For the 28-day, 2 this time this year, 4 last year. And year-to-date, 38 compared to 33. For robberies, 7 this year for the 7-day compared to 16 this time last year. 52 in the 28-day compared to 68. 421 year-to-date compared to 567. For aggravated assaults, it's been 5 and 5 for the 7-day. 28 compared to 36 this time last year. And year-to-date, 310 compared to 322.
Thank you, Councilman Scheifler.
I got a series of questions, but the chairman over here kept me quiet until my precincts came up, so the northern and the northwestern. And as you guys know, I'm pretty in tune with
Councilman, into the mic. We're still on TV.
with what's going on out there on the street, and so, I'm just curious on a couple things. So I'll direct it to the Chief of Patrol. First of all, how long have you been the Chief of Patrol?
Since May.
Since May. Okay. In looking at how things are done, would you agree with me that the biggest asset that the department has should be its people, its patrol officers, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. So do you guys ever, and I assume you're in charge of all of them. So do you ever poll these officers just on general things? I mean, like every company or organization would with thousands of employees to know what's going on, to know what, what people are feeling on the ground, whether anonymously or not anonymously. Do you guys have any mechanism to do that, and have you guys ever done that?
I don't do it, no.
You don't. So then, okay, so if you guys aren't doing that, which seems a little silly to me, but how often do you and I guess the area commanders visit roll calls to actually have FaceTime with the officers in the districts?
Not enough.
I mean, does it happen on a monthly basis at least, or?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't happen a lot, no.
And the area commanders too. Obviously, you.
I can't speak on their behalf. I can only speak on my behalf.
Gotcha. Okay. And if you're not internally polling people just on general things, whether it be operations, new initiatives, how ideas and things are going, I mean, how do you judge, and what metrics are you working off of to make tough decisions like, I don't know, who gets promoted, who gets moved, who gets shifted? I mean, how is that determined if not attending roll calls, you have no mechanism to talk to what you guys have acknowledged should be the biggest asset, the patrol officers and the officers that are directly communicating with our constituents and our citizens. So what are we relying on?
Sir, I think that, I think what the Colonel was saying was that, can we improve in terms of how we are reaching the officers? I would say that the district commanders and the deputy commanders certainly would have their pulse on the men and women that are working under them. I do know that there have been, obviously, that the chief has certainly went out to districts himself. The area colonels have certainly have done that. To the actual number that they're doing that, will he have those actual numbers? No, and I wouldn't have them either. But I do know that we're in constant and direct contact with our commanders all of the time, and that we are relying, obviously, on our commanders to gauge and also to monitor what those officers are doing, and also to get the general temperature, as you stated, as how officers are doing in the street. And then there are other things too, like we have the health and wellness program that the agency has to determine, and that it's obviously anonymous, that officers can contact that office there and have conversations with the clinic specialists there to, if there's any issues that they may be experiencing there. In terms of how we do things, in terms of promotions and transfers, those things are governed by policy. So anytime those things are happening, generally that's the rule of how things are done.
You said by policy?
Yes, there's policies for transfers, there's policies for that, yes, sir.
I mean, and there are policies on how those transfers happen. The question was more directed at who makes those, determinations and what metrics are being used to do it. Obviously, you follow policy when making a transfer.
I thought you were speaking of in terms of if you're saying that if a person wanted to transfer to be a detective in CID, there's a posting that occurs and there's a policy that oversees how that occurs.
No, I understand that aspect. I'm saying if you guys say, when you look at the different districts and you see things that are working, things aren't working. I mean, one of the common things that you hear across the board, across the city, is that a lot of times people are not being promoted for the right reasons. I mean, in general, in the real world, you get promoted as a reward. As you've accomplished something, you move up, and you also do that based on talent and based on skill sets. So you could have the smartest person, in your company, but they might not be an operations person. So you're not going to have that person, manage a division of your company, but you may have them be an analyst or put them in a different position like that, where it seems like, I mean, and I have a whole chart on it, so, seeing how different transfers have taken place, despite the fact that I've requested this information countless times and have not gotten any responses on it. With those transfers, there's been no mechanisms used that have shown that the people who are moving into the positions that they're moving in are moving into those positions based on a skill set or based on a reward of accomplishing something within their previous area before they move into the next area. But obviously, we know we're not looking into the specifics there, so getting to the bottom of that is going to be quite difficult. But you did say that a lot of this is the emphasis is put on the district commanders. So to what level do you give leeway to the district commanders? Are the district commanders able to decide who they work with? If I was a major of a district, can I pick who my captains are? Can I pick who my lieutenants are? Can I pick who my sergeants are?
Generally not, no.
Okay, so who makes that determination?
That determination is generally made by either myself or the police commissioner with input from the chief of patrol, or if it's a CID matter, it would be the relevant chief.
So, and how's that been working for us?
I think it's been working fine.
Okay, well, look, respectfully, I would say that I disagree with that. And, you know, I know you guys are working hard, and I appreciate the work you're doing. You know I appreciate it. The officers on the street surely know that I appreciate it, and I show my appreciation. But at the same time, the reality of it is if you're not, and I'm not directing this at you personally,
sure.
Okay, so don't take it that way.
I'm not taking it that way, sir.
I'm directing it as just the channels of the leadership. And if you're not talking to you're not talking to the people on the street to really get an idea of what's going on out there, there's no mechanism for them to even communicate that without there being some form of punishment for going above certain people's heads and doing that. If we're not speaking to those people and we're not getting that information to find out what's working, what's not working, I mean, why would if I was the police commissioner, I wouldn't.
Councilman,
No,
I'm going to have to get you're sounding like one of our nameless colleagues. We're going to have a question in there somewhere.
My question is, do you believe that it's the right strategy for yourself, the police commissioner, to decide who the district commander's staff is?
Yes, I absolutely do believe that. I think that certainly. I think that the commissioner obviously is the reigning authority in terms of who he elects to decide, he or she elects to decide who to come to a district is his responsibility to do so.
Right, and you were saying that you put an emphasis on the district, you're relying heavily on district leadership and that you guys communicate with them quite often. And I know that that is the case.
Sure.
But if we're not allowing those people, if we're not empowering them to be able to make the decisions that they feel are going to work, then what we're doing is we're failing on the street. And I'm going to give a couple examples. So,
Councilman, let me stop you there. We got to remember that we have a second hearing about budgeting and staffing. I think your questions will be better suited for that hearing.
Well, I got some questions for the budgeting one, but I think
this is around crime-specific stuff. So if we're talking patrol numbers, crime numbers, et cetera, if you could hold those questions about staffing, I think they would be better suited for the next hearing and actually better answered by people who are who are not yet seated in the positions. Any other questions about the crime in the Northern District? All right, we'll go to the Northwestern District. Colonel.
So in the Northwest District for the 7-day, the Northwest has had 4 homicides compared to 1 this time last year. In the 28, 7 compared to 3. Year-to-date, 25 compared to 35. Non-fatal shootings in 7-day, 1 compared to 4. 28-day, 13 compared to 8. In the year-to-date, 62 compared to 56. For robberies, it's 5 against 5, which is an even slate. 28-day, it's 40 compared to 28. And year-to-date, 379 compared to 386, which is a slight reduction. Aggravated assault, 10 compared to 14. 41 and 41. Year-to-date is 383 compared to 474.
Thank you. The last homicide in the Northwest was the one in the 4600 block of Liberty Heights Avenue involving the 73-year-old man, correct? I know that's one
Yes, that's correct.
Councilman Burnett is very concerned about. Can we talk about that? I know, Councilman, you might have some other questions as well. Councilman? Colonel, go ahead.
So I don't want to dig too deep in it, but I can tell you this, that we're really close to closing actually 3 cases that have to do with that. So that's one of our pattern cases, 2 homicides and actually 1 shooting. And 1 case is already closed, and we really strongly believe that we will close all 3 of these cases, put them all down. So I'm really confident. Actually, one subject is actually off the street. So I think that this pattern is closed.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, that was absolutely a tragedy. And definitely received a lot of feedback. I'm sure my colleagues who also have covered the Northwest as well. The other thing that has stood out to me in this particular district is the continued uptick, or seemingly continued uptick, in auto thefts and robberies. And you indicated that there does seem to be a link between that particular shooting. And then just going through, as I've been sitting here looking at the amount of robberies citywide, larcenies, auto thefts. I mean, in the Northwest, they're up 100%, 16% year to date. What are we, obviously there's a link. What are we doing to get control of the robberies citywide, but as it relates to this particular district to try and stay on track? What are we doing in the Northwest?
So again, we have 3 patterns in this district, 2 of which are closed. They all average about 8 to 10 robberies. So once we identify the pattern, of course, we go after the target, and I think we've been pretty successful with the investigation side. One of the street robbery patterns, actually suspects in the Northwest, had something to do with the Southern District incident that we had. So we're seeing this, a large majority of these incidents are occurring around the city. So they're not just stagnant anymore. We have social media, we have vehicles that are involved. They're carjacking one person and involved in these street robbery patterns. So again, we have one that hit as late as 10/6, which was a couple days ago, and this one is still open. The suspect provides a ride, the same thing that we talked about in the other district, where it's a hack, and we have the robbery. That's a part of that pattern that we talked about when we talked in the Northern District. So we are identifying these patterns, and we're going after the targets, which I think we've been pretty successful on the investigative side.
Okay.
Yeah. And if you take a look, I mean, we haven't talked about this, but the homicides and shootings in the month of August, between August 24th and now, that's when we saw the rise in crime. During that month, we closed 15 non-fatal shootings, 7 homicides, and if you take a look at the victimology, the majority of the homicides that these individuals that are deceased have been arrested 10.9 times, and if you look at the non-fatal shootings, 9.2 times. So a lot of these people are very familiar to us. As the Colonel said, we are targeting them and we're making arrests. It's just, of course, they're getting out, and we're repeating the same process over and over again.
And let me just add, I'm going to work with my colleagues, and I'll work with our media section. We'll create some flyers, and by being a community division, we'll make sure we get those flyers out so there's an awareness, a raised awareness of what's going on in the community, so people can be more familiar with the surroundings. But more importantly, they may be able to dial into some things that we're telling them and be able to report some things that's not being reported now.
And that would, on that note, and we can work offline, in the Southwest, we have a meeting this Saturday, 11 to 1. The community-wide meeting. It'd be helpful to have those documents available to the residents.
Okay.
Even if it's a matter of you just sending it to me, and I can run off the copies.
All right.
It's at Southwest District.
All right, great. Got you.
Councilman, let them run the copies. Their budget is bigger than yours.
Okay, y'all run the copies. I'll come pick them up. The other question is for Mr. Vetter, but it ties into this larger question around robberies. How much of, I mean, yes, we look at violent crime as a metric for the allocation of resources. How much consideration is put on patterns of robberies, which we've seen both recently in the Southeastern District, where there was a robbery, and in Federal Hill, that was a robbery turned deadly. How much does that also weigh into your analysis of the placement of cameras, and even for patrol? where does this fit into it if we see that there's an intersectionality between these two types of crimes?
Thank you, Councilman, for the question. It is something that factors in. What we're able to do when we do the types of data overlays that I referred to earlier is not just look at homicides and shootings, but also look at all, violent crime, all gun-related violent crime. Most of those robberies are committed with firearms, so they count as, a gun-related crime. And we are able to factor that in when we do different types of analysis to determine where resources are allocated, be it police officers or city watch cameras.
So as far as with the troll about the robberies, I mean, I look at the robberies. I understand there are certain areas of the city they get hit more often than not. Would the Northwest District be one of those districts where I would actually look at the pattern? Honestly, the Northwest only had 5 robberies in a 7-day period, compared to the Southeast, which had roughly like 19 or 20.
Yeah, I mean, but if you look at the last 7 days, there's been 6 auto thefts.
And with auto thefts,
12.
And that's going to be something where I really don't believe that the City Watch program would actually, I don't think City Watch is actually designed for that. It's about reducing violence. Property crime is going to be property crime, and a lot of things add into auto thefts. People leaving things in their vehicles, as far as largely from autos, leaving their car running, it being an area where it's a residential area, which is a little bit easier to steal a vehicle than on a main strip. The City Watch program is limited. They can only go so far. And the Northwest District itself is a huge district. It probably encompasses all the city. You could put all the citywide cameras in Northwest District and probably still not have it all covered.
And I'm not saying that this is the absolute solution, but I mean, to your point, I mean, I would imagine having video of a vehicle traveling down Liberty Heights Avenue would be helpful to you if it fits a recent theft. I mean, knowing the vehicle description, the tag number, are you saying that City Watch does not look for that type of information?
No, well, they do all the time, and we have cameras all over the city. Sure. And yeah, absolutely. And City Watch is not just the cameras itself. I mean, they rely on other factors as far as other things they can reach out to. We have an MCAC system, MCAC center that actually works with our LPR systems that is constantly taking pictures. We have stationary LPRs, mobile LPRs. There are a ton of cameras throughout Baltimore City, but the City Watch program itself is limited to certain areas of the city.
And final question, again, tied to robberies and auto thefts. How much overlap does City Watch have with our special investigations team in the housing department? Because they also have extensive camera coverage looking mostly targeting areas of illegal dumping, but a lot of those areas are alleyways and areas that I would imagine you also would probably see other crimes occurring. How much of that of collaboration do we see between the housing department and the police department?
Yes, sir. So Sam Hood, who oversees that, obviously does, I'm sorry, can you hear me? Does a great job. There's certainly connectivity in terms of all the other various city agencies, state agencies, in terms of the connectivity with the cameras. Anytime we're doing like big operations such as Fleet Week, things like that, those things come down into our center downtown, but also in the atrium. So there are pieces there that we can kind of connect to. There are relationships there, and there are different systems that we're able to get into other proprietary, not necessarily proprietary, but other camera systems that we can work with them to, deal with the crime that we're seeing at the time. So there is connectivity, is what I'm saying.
And I think for future hearings, it would be helpful to give examples of that, at least for me, examples of which we've seen that overlap. I mean, I know that this hearing is about the police department, but we have constantly been pushing on this council that there has to be collaboration between all agencies, sure. And everyone plays that role. And so if there's an untapped resource that we're leaving on the table, I think that's a problem. And I'm not saying that's happening or not, but I think it would be useful for Mr. Chairman to have a hearing. Maybe it's bringing in Sam Hood to talk about that.
I would invite you. I don't know if you've been to the City Watch program.
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
I've been there, and okay.
Yeah.
So, and Sam does a great presentation as well.
Are you done, Councilman Burnett?
For Northwest, yeah.
Yeah. Colonel, just to go back, the homicide that preceded the gentleman on Liberty Heights was in the 4300 block of Park Heights Avenue, Of course, you know, that's an area that the police department is going to be frequent in. What I'm interested in is that looking at the calls for service for that block for this year, which, as you would expect, there are a lot, but also looking at the other Part 1 crimes that happened there. There have been 5 ag assaults in that one block alone this year. Can you tell us about, like, what we're doing for that area? And we know that it's very close to Park Heights and Cold Spring, where I grew up. That is an area that is always a hotbed for violence, unfortunately. So can we talk about what's going on there? Because it seems that the citizens are making the calls. They're making the calls that they need to make, but they seem to be not getting the result that they're seeking.
So, I mean, I don't want to go into all the investigations in that area, but there's been a lot of enforcement in that area, in and around that area, through our federal partners, through our other units inside the department. The issue with Park Heights Avenue is that when Dion Hatchett was there in Atis now, it was further up Park Heights. It was Park Heights and Belvedere, you know, in that area up there, and it was like, that's where you got to hit your flag. That's where the flag has to be planted.
5100 block.
Right. So we took some incidents down there, and 5 aggravated assaults, yeah, down and around that area. I'm not going to say it's not a lot, but I'm not going to say it's a lot. I mean, I understand that it is concentrated. There's a drug shop up there. And like I say, we've definitely taken off some targets. Maybe Colonel Conway can touch on that. But there's definitely things in and around the Northwest District that is still ongoing.
Thank you. Colonel, you want to follow up at all?
The only thing that I want to add to that is that that is a part of that pattern case.
Okay.
So,
thank you. Thank you. Councilman Scheifler.
Yes. So first of all, you know, while we're on that topic there, you know, I have noticed a major increase in patrols and enforcement around the Belvedere corridor, and I've personally seen some of the other state partners and other people you guys are working with pull drugs and guns out of cars. So I do thank you for that. I do want to ask a couple questions, and I read over the bill synopsis first to make sure I'm compliant with the chairman's request. So. Crime-related, whose decision was it to pull the DDU officers out of the districts?
It was my decision, sir.
And has that worked out for us?
Has it worked out? In terms of building up our staffing and patrol, it has, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, in patrol, but I'm saying overall in the crime fight. I mean, the most important thing I view, and I think and I've said this on numerous occasions, and I'll say it again during the budget part, is that there's certain things that the department does that it's very efficient, and we get a great return on investment as far as citizens of Baltimore, and things like the crime lab and the great work that they do, and they resolve crime. And so the detectives in the district, I mean, these guys I know firsthand, have seen it countless times, they're resolving crime in those areas. And if we're not resolving crime, you end up with the frustration that I know the officers on the street have, although I don't either poll them, but I do talk to a lot of people, and it is quite frustrating when you lock somebody up for assault or whatever else it is, and then you see them back out the next day. They do the same thing over and over and over again. So I certainly can understand the frustration there, but if we're not resolving crime on some of these violent offenders and people who are committing certain crimes on the district level that are being pieced together, and we don't have those district detectives, what I have found is that, and what I've heard at community meetings, and the police department's heard it at the community meetings that they've attended, you have community leaders who are saying, oh, well, you know, this incident happened and that incident happened, those are connected, how come nobody's, you know, connected the dots? Or we've told you guys about camera footage that has been directly, right next to an incident that took place, and we call down to the district and nobody's ever followed up with us. And then when they call the front desk, the response that they're given is, I'm sorry, we don't have district detectives anymore. And so you have evidence that the community's trying to pass on to the department that's not occurring, and that's, as a result, I've seen the turn instantly when those district detectives got pulled out of the districts.
So, well, let me start, please. Thank you. So first, let me start off by saying that we did have to move the district detectives from out of that into patrol because patrol was critically short. We understand that. But at no time did we say that those instances where aggravated assaults and burglaries were not going to be investigated. We just had to think about how we were going to do that. So we had to really go back to a way, even when I was here, when I first came on in 1987, the way we did those things. And that was kind of the thought process behind it. But also, and I said this earlier, and I'm not sure whether you were here at that particular time, every one of the 9 districts has a sergeant supervisor who is responsible for overseeing those investigations. It was never the intent that those cases would never be investigated or someone would be following up. Now, I don't know what specific case that you're referring to, and we can certainly talk about that offline, or whether or not that's an issue, because the other councilman brought up a similar issue in his district as well, which is telling us that we need to do some things, and Colonel Conaway is aware of that. So we're going to be talking about that. But it was never the intent, and it certainly should not be happening. There should be follow-up investigations that are being conducted by the patrol officers, that are being supervised by the major crimes sergeant that is within each one of the 9 districts. Those sergeants that are there are the same sergeants that supervise the DDUs when there were 2 detectives assigned to each one of the districts. We're not talking about a vast amount of detectives from the beginning. We were only talking about 2, possibly, and maybe one district may have had 3. It was only 2 bodies and a sergeant. That was it. So we think that we could have been more efficient in terms of what we were doing for the patrol side, because we needed to do those, and I think we've talked about that. But also from the investigative side, that supervision is still there. That accountability and that responsibility is still on that supervisor that's still in the district. Byron, I'm sorry, Colonel Conaway, I don't know if you had something to add to that.
No, I think you said it well.
Yeah, you did say it, and I do know that the supervisor's still there, and I happen to have a great one in the Northwest, and so by no means am I not appreciative for that. But again, when you have these incidents that are, you know, different priorities, I guess, across the city, you know what the priorities are in my district, because I make them pretty clear. Sure. But when we do have cases that can't be investigated because there's simply just not the manpower, you can't expect that supervisor to be able to have the available time to do the investigation that needs to take place. And the reality of what I've seen is that I've brought up, we want to talk about efficiency. Last year I brought up, or when you guys started, I brought up a very simple, efficient thing that could be put in place immediately. For some reason, when I go into the Northern District, within 15 to 20 minutes of when a shift starts, the officers are out on the street. And when I would go into the Northwest District at the same time, it would take 45 minutes to an hour plus. And when you do the math district by district and talk about the amount of hours that are sitting fooling around in the roll call room versus getting out on the street responding to calls, those are things in the amount of hours that go back out on the street with simple shifts, with simple moves like that, is far more than the amount of hours that are being put in by, how many detectives got put back on the street?
36.
36. There was 36 that left.
My division to patrol.
Not DD. Now, clarification.
Okay. So 36 total out of CID.
To include
the ones that were in DDU.
Right. And so when that shift happened, how many of those officers, and I know one of them personally, how many of them either quit, retired, or left the force for whatever reason when that shift happened?
It was very little. I think we talked about this at the last hearing. I think it might have been two or three at the most, that when they went back, I'm sorry?
No, you're right, sir. You're right. It wasn't many. It was maybe 2. That's it.
Just 2 of them.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was it. Yes, sir.
And Deputy Commissioner, I think for me, because this is a concern here all over the city, but for me, you know, I'm a data-driven person. So for me, if you guys for the next one could show us the rate of closure on burglaries this time last year versus now, to see if it's an impact, if it's hurting, if it's helping, I think that for once and all, the numbers will determine how the decision's being met out. Because we do hear that from the officers a lot, that they don't have time to answer the calls that they have to answer. As you know, I don't think they should have to answer all of the ones that are non-emergency calls. But if we could just get that breakdown number to see where we are with the closures for the cases that DDU would have handled versus the ones that they actually handled last year.
Yes, sir.
Councilman. Good. On to the Western.
So for the Western District, for the 7-day, we've had 1 homicide compared to 1 this time last year. 4 in the 28-day compared to 5 this time last year. Year-to-date, 34 compared to 40 this time last year. Non-fatals, it's been one non-fatal shooting in the 7-day compared to 3 this time last year. 8 compared to 11 in the 28-day. 74 compared to 98 in the year-to-date numbers. For robberies, it's been 4 compared to 9 in the 7-day. 41 compared to 36 in the 28-day. And 275 compared to 296 year-to-date. For aggravated assaults, it's been 18 compared to 15, which is an uptick of 20%. Year-to-date, I apologize, 28-day, it's been 49, 53 compared to 78. And then year-to-date, 457 compared to 510.
Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking at the hour. I'm not going to tell y'all how to do strategy, and I'm not going to tell you any particular corner in the district. All I'm going to do is say I believe Major Webb and his team are doing a great job. Don't take any of his resources. Give him more resources. Sometimes I think we look at the numbers and say, okay, you're doing good. Don't take that as a sign that any of his officers can be deployed to somewhere else. My only, I guess, critique that I would have is that obviously our focus needs to be on the violence in the community, but at the same time, we can't neglect the number of drug corners. And in Western District, I mean, like the Matthew Henson community, certain sections of Sandtown, Alcontrolli Terrace area, our residents need some relief. And right now, they're not getting it. The violence is going down, but as it relates to the drug activity, it's just getting more bold. And my hope is that that boldness that's happening in certain sections doesn't lead to something else, but guys are getting real comfortable. And so that would be my only request.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. On to the Southwest District.
So for the Southwest District, in the 7 days, there's been 5 homicides compared to 1, which is an uptick of 400%. 10 shootings in the 28-day compared to 3, which is an uptick of 233%. 41 year-to-date compared to 37, which is an uptick of 11%. For non-fatals, it's been 1 compared to 0 this time last year. 6 in the 28-day compared to 10 this time last year. And 69 compared to 73 this time last year for non-fatals. For robberies, it's been 16 compared to 12, which is an uptick of 33%. 56 in the 28-day compared to 45 this time last year, which is an uptick of 24%. 355 compared to 434 for year-to-date numbers. Aggravated assaults, it's been 15 compared to 8, which is an uptick of 88%. 28-day, 44 compared to 56. And for year-to-date, it's 593 compared to 560, which is an uptick of 6%.
Councilman Burnett.
So, yeah, I mean, I mentioned what I had to say about the Frederick corridor and the Edmonton corridor. I will mention that a lot of, to my colleague's point about the drug corners, in many parts of my district, whether it's, again, those 2 particular areas, there's a lot of belief that a lot of what is driving it or sustaining the drug markets is collaboration with some of the corner stores and liquor stores. Can you talk about the work that's being done to crack down on problematic stores? I mean, I've witnessed it. These guys are very bold. I've sent information, things that I've seen on social media from store owners, from folks. I mean, it's bold to see things online on social media in corridors that I represent. Can we talk a little bit about that? I mean, there's, like I said, that Frederick Avenue stretch, the Shell gas station, the Baltimore and Hilton gas station. There is a lot of belief from the community that these folks, these owners, store owners, are not being held accountable. They sustain both the drug distribution And there's a belief that, you know, the larger frustration, and I don't want to step on the constitutionality of being able to stand outside in front of a business. If you can do that at the harbor, you should be able to do that on Frederick Avenue. But there are concerns that in and out is not being addressed, and that there are drugs being stored inside of stores, being used as stash spots. One, can you talk about collaboration with the finance department? I'm well aware of how the late night operating license program operates. Two, we have a new community liaison and the liquor board. Can you talk about collaboration with that particular individual, with the liquor board itself, and enforcement with a lot of these commercial properties that, and this is not, I know this is not just a Southwest District. I see my colleagues' heads nodding. This is all over the city where these folks are not being held accountable.
What we do is we meet every day in the VRI. We go over problematic businesses. To address the first one, Baltimore and Hilton, they were on the verge of being padlocked, and we gave them basically a checklist of things they needed to do. They did every single thing that we asked them to do, and their camera system has improved dramatically, and they're now cooperating with police. Another business that we just found out today, 1000 West Lombard, even though it's a tri-district, we had some issues with that business. The liquor board went in there, found $10,000 worth of illegal tobacco, so we're going to try to shut them down. But for the padlock to work, you have to have 2 acts of violence directly associated with that business. If we don't reach that, there's a lesser law, a nuisance law. But we work with the Social Club Task Force, goes out to all these businesses every single Friday, plus they're doing inspections every single day. We go in with underage officers, cadets, trying to buy liquor from these establishments. And the very first phase, as soon as we get a problematic business, the commanders have to meet with them, then the commissioner will send them a letter saying, hey, you're on our radar. If nothing improves, then we bring them into a face-to-face and we tell them, listen, if you don't improve these locations, we're going to shut you down. The good thing is the majority have, but there's still several that have not. 3300 Garrison we shut down last year because they refused to cooperate with us. There's several of them that are on that list, and then every Thursday after the VRI meeting at 9 o'clock, Kendra and the Problematic Business Association Task Force basically meets, and basically it's an extension of the VRI with a smaller group that focuses just on those problematic businesses. And then just yesterday, what we had is Major Herzog is also going to put his people, his task force people, to see if they can hit them from another avenue. We have a couple business owners in the city who own 20 to 25 problematic businesses who have their names etched in there somewhere, but they're in the background, and that money has been traced all the way back to Yemen. So we've got a lot of stuff going on that is behind the scenes that we can't shut down the businesses yet, but we're working on it.
Year to date, how many, and this is I guess for the Southwest would be helpful, have been shut down? And if you don't have this, maybe this can be, again, a request for after this hearing. But I think that would be helpful information, because I get a tremendous amount of calls from people wanting to know why liquor stores and corner stores are not being held accountable for the activity in front and inside their stores. Could we get more information on how many, and I'm aware of the padlock locations, but how often is the nuisance law utilized? You mentioned acts of violence. How do we define violence? Is that gun violence? Is that an aggravated assault?
Robbery, aggravated assault, homicide, shootings, anything that is a person's crime, basically. And if it's a property crime or a CDS crime, then that comes under the nuisance law. That doesn't go to the padlock, which basically has the same authority. It just takes a little more evidence with that, as opposed to 2, you may need 3 or 4 CDS violations or a handgun violation to get in there and shut the business down.
So in specifically to the Southwest, the Shell gas station on Swan and Edmondson just this last month has had over 2 acts of violence associated with that location, yet people are still pumping gas right now.
Well, we can't just because they've had 2 acts of violence, we just can't go in and shut them down. It has to be a judge or a chairperson of the panel that has to shut them down. The police department, we can't just go in and say, hey, you're shut down for 48 hours or whatever the amount of time is until we have a hearing and they go through the due process of getting their business. I don't like it. It's irritating. It's frustrating, but it's part of the law.
And this is under the law department?
Yes, it's run through the Housing Special Investigation. Every Thursday, myself, Mark Dwyer from the BPD Law Department, Rob DeRocher from Housing, we meet on a conference call and we go over the businesses. Right now, we got about 40 businesses that are on there, and about 15 of them have active investigations on them. The only one to date that's been closed, as far as we know, is Forest Park and Windsor Mill, and that was closed when Colonel Conaway was in the Southwest.
Yeah, that was, yeah.
But some businesses, we had one just recently in the Northern, we put enough pressure on it that the owner just packed his stuff and closed the business down. So we'd rather have them cooperate than shut them down. But if they don't want to cooperate, we're going to do it. It's unfortunate. It just takes a little time to get through the legality of it.
Can anyone from the administration speak to the delay in enforcement on these issues?
Mr. Vedder.
I don't think that thanks, Councilman. I don't think I have enough information to speak to the delay because I'm not familiar with what the current pipeline is. I was just going to point out, though, that the rules that Colonel Worley is referencing are in the city code under the public nuisance section, and that, clearly lays out the process step by step as to what needs to happen from a due process standpoint to utilize the police commissioner's padlocking authority, which is really, it's a public nuisance action. It includes a hearing, an opportunity for the business to make its case. It specifies that it needs to be before a judge and what findings need to be made and kind of what the criteria is. I can say I know there have been discussions in the past about how to tweak that law to perhaps make it a little bit easier to use and more effective, without trampling on the rights of the business owner. So you do want to strike that balance, but it's a city ordinance that the city council has authority over. So it is something that I think we could probably put a work group together to examine the different parts of the process and any tweaks that we might want to make with legislation.
Yeah, and I think part of that work group it sounds like finance should be a part of that conversation, because I'm hearing a couple things that there could be opportunities to revisit the law. I'm well aware of the nuisance law. However, what I'm hearing is that the process seems to be arduous due to either a lack of the number of hearings. Maybe I'm hearing it wrong, but it sounds like this is a staffing issue that's associated with the length of time it takes. I mean, yes, people should have due process. I'm not in any way suggesting we should just be sweepingly shutting down businesses. However, if you have a list of 40 of them, and I know the ones in the Southwest for sure have been problems since before I became a member of this council. In talking to, I mentioned the community cleanup I had on Saturday. I talked to an officer who was assigned to the Southwest District who's been retired for about 15 years, and he was still very familiar with the same stores on that same stretch being a problem then. And so I'm just very curious as to if this law is on the books, why is this not something that is being used as a tool?
It is being used as a tool, and it's not a staffing issue. We can close it down. One of the worst areas is in Councilman's district, the Belvedere that shopping center with Maxway. There's been multiple incidents there, but there's 5 or 6 businesses there, and we can't pin it to one business. So we can't say, okay, your business is responsible because he got shot in the parking lot. Now, what we hope with that is they just changed owners, so we're hoping we get some
and Councilman, I think that we should talk, because I think that there's some other council members who have actually been looking at the law and think that some of our other counterparts, some of whom in other cities, have updated their nuisance law to make it some things that will automatically trigger hearings and things like that. So we should talk about that offline.
Last thing, finance has been awesome since they took over their late night business licenses. They've been awesome. We've probably denied more late-night business licenses in the last 6 months than we have in the last 4 years.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that they aren't doing their job. I'm just saying I meant more from a budgetary perspective. It sounded to me like what you were describing was a process that was understaffed. If it's a need for a work group, I would absolutely like to be a part of that conversation, because a number of the areas that the Southwest District and the Northwest District experience a number of violence, and I'm sure it's the same across the city. There's ties to corner stores and liquor stores, and the data bears that out. I mean, Johns Hopkins, I'm sure you saw that study. There is an uptick in violence due to density in liquor stores, and so those should be the types of things that we're looking at really honing in on. All right, yeah, we need patrol, we need investigations, but if there are other tools in the tool bank that aren't and I think it would be helpful, and I'm not saying, again, not trying to say that you guys had not come to the council to say, look, I think we should tweak this or that. I'm not aware of it, but I'm sure it's happening. But I think we should have a heightened sense of urgency around these conversations, that if something isn't working that the council can be a part of fixing, those are things that should be brought forth to all of us, and especially to our chairman. Thank you. I'm done.
Last but not least, we'll go to the Southern District.
So for the Southern District, I'm just getting down to the numbers. 1 second. So for homicides, there's been no homicides in the past 7 days compared to 0 this time last year. 4 in the 28 compared to 1, which is an uptick of 300%. 35 year-to-date compared to 24, which is an uptick of 46%. Non-fatal shootings has been 4 in the 7-day compared to 1, which is a 300% increase. 7 compared to 11, then 53 to 81 for year-to-date. For robberies, there's been 15 in 7 days compared to 9, which is an uptick of 67%. 54 in the 28-day compared to 55, and then year-to-date 467 compared to 576. Aggravated assaults, there's been 16 compared to 13, 7-day, which is an uptick of 23%. 46 compared to 56, and then 474 compared to 626 year-to-date for ag assaults.
Councilman Costello.
Thank you.
That's a no-look call.
Thank you. Can we first, Colonel Conway, thank you. Your detectives were absolutely outstanding. Bob Cherry, Mike Mancuso, I think there were 6 or 7 others. I sent them a thank you note. Appreciate everything that you guys did and the way that you carried yourselves and worked with the community. So thank you very much. Can we talk about the robberies piece real quick? And just the increase in those. I know we've had a number of those on the peninsula recently.
So first of all, I want to start off by saying that we started a robbery initiative over there the last couple of weeks, which has been pretty successful. I've sent you the updates as to the subjects that were arrested, during that tour. Also, if you take a look at the patterns that you've had, you have 3 patterns that stand out to us, 3 of which are closed, and we have, I'm sorry, 4, but 1 is still remaining open, and that pattern's in Brooklyn. This is suspects that are using a black handgun. They're staying within that 3700 block of South Hanover Street, 411 East Jeffrey Street, and 3600 3rd Street. The majority of those robberies are happening just after 9 o'clock at night. We had one that happened a little bit earlier. You are well aware of the Riverside pattern that we had, which is closed as well. So the team, I think, is doing pretty well with taking a look at patterns and closing the patterns and getting, on the investigative side. And again, we're using that robbery initiative. Now we moved over to the Southeast District because, as we stated earlier, they're having issues over there. But we plan on still continuing the fight over in the Southern District from the CID perspective.
Excellent. And the robbery last night, I know when I spoke to the shift commander about 11:30, we had 2 out of 6. Did we get the remaining 4? Or do you know if we did?
I don't know if we did or not, but we can definitely follow up and get
I
you
can follow up on that. I'm not sure.
All right, great. Last piece is actually 2 things. One, for my colleagues' benefit, because I'm aware and I appreciate the quick response on this, the KKK flyers that were disseminated. I know what you all are doing, but if you could share with what you can share publicly with my colleagues, because I think that's something that's concerning to the entire council.
So I can't really go too far into that because that's a criminal intel piece. We have documented that, and our federal partners are well aware of it as well. So we're looking at it as an investigation.
Suffice to say, you guys are taking it extremely seriously.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. That's reassuring. And the last piece is with Halloween coming up, as you all are aware, last year on the peninsula we had 6 violent incidents. I know that Major Brown and some of you that were at the forum last week talked about stepped up patrols. Can you give a brief overview of that? I recognize you can't get into deployment figures or patterns or anything like that, but.
So we'll be having actually a meeting coming up next week, and then right before Halloween itself, another meeting to actually, get the exact numbers where we're going to actually put people. But we'll have a commitment through downtown. We'll have overtime out there. We didn't cancel leave. I have to look at that. I don't believe we did cancel leave for Halloween. We understand the Southern took the brunt of a lot of our violence last year on Halloween. Because it goes from the Southeast District around to the Central and around down to the Southern District. But there's definitely going to be a heavier deployment out there. I don't want to talk about the zones and the areas that we will be in, but there's definitely going to be a marked improvement over last year.
Excellent. And I certainly don't want to suggest, I would never suggest to you any type of command or deployment modifications that you should make. I defer to you. That's your job. But I do hope that it's increased from last year, because last year got pretty bad. We had a woman who was hit in the face with a 2x4, and we cannot have a repeat of that this year.
And I absolutely agree.
Okay. Can we, Colonel, can you and I catch up a couple days before Halloween just so I can get some information to share with my constituents that you're comfortable with me sharing?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And before we close out and switch, I want to follow up earlier to something that we were talking about in response to patrol staffing. And Mr. Sinema, this is a question for you. What is the Budget Bureau's and the administration's position on the staffing study that was done? Because there seemed to be some confusion. It seems that the folks that did the staffing study, the consent decree, and other folks say that we do have enough people to beef up patrol. It's just an administrative decision of the police commissioner not to do that. That happens to be the sentiment of majority of members of the council as well. But the police department, mainly the commissioner, keeps saying that we don't have those people. And I know that we've been going back and forth with you and them about civilianization. Where do you stand on that? Do you stand by the staffing study that you guys asked for?
I can speak from my review of it.
Yes,
I just got through it last week.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's parts of it that I agree with. There are parts that it clearly has identified areas where there might be some inefficiencies or things we could do better. There are parts that I think are not fully fleshed out that I don't fully agree with. So I do think it has identified, and that's part of what has led the push to kind of do some civilianization. It says that it clearly can be done, and we've identified some of that, or at least a first phase of that, which we'll share in the next review. Yep. I can't say from my review that I was fully comfortable for all the numbers that they had put together on patrol specifically. I think the work that the teams are doing is as part of our union negotiations too, and trying to get to a better schedule that works, I feel more comfortable with than what was in the study. But that's, again, just my point of view.
Thank you, Chief. You don't have to respond. We can go to the next. Thank you, everyone, for this. And the Public Safety Committee is now in recess. I think we're going to go into recess for 60 seconds as we swap out. Thank you.